Welcome back, folks. Week 7. What are we talking about in week 7? Well, we're looking at gendered identities and gendered institutions. We're continuing to look at those. Last week we looked at the gendered family. This week we're looking at the gendered classroom. We've all had education in our lives, primary, secondary, and post-secondary education. And whether we know it or not, that education was a major part of us developing a gendered self. One of the major themes throughout this book is the hidden reality that is gender, and it comes out as the hidden curriculum in education. How we let our young people, girls and boys, understand what is appropriate behavior in reference to their gender. Referring back to the interplanetary theory of gender, this is an idea that boys and girls are fundamentally different. We've seen this throughout this course. In this case, boys, of course, are better in math and science. They're more willing and inclined to engage in roughhousing or physically violent behavior. They're more likely to leave shout out in classes, whereas girls are supposed to be quiet and docile. They speak softly. They don't play as aggressive. And they excel in literature and the social sciences, not the math and the hard sciences. Of course, sociologists note these differences in the hidden curriculum are as much responsible for why girls aren't doing as well in science and are doing better in literature and social science as it is something that's biological to the individuals. Our informal interactions with teachers and other students transform us into good little gendered future workers. It's like being in a gender factory, and our teachers and, of course, our classmates interpret what is appropriate and inappropriate ways to act as boys and girls. When we look at education, there's a reality that in the past, education was primarily for men and done by men. Up into the early 1900s, the only people that went to get some sort of formal education were middle to upper class males, whether that was the nobility or those going into the priesthood. It was males that got education. It was believed that women were actually too weak to be educated. They just didn't have the constitution. You ladies just didn't have the constitution to actually deal with the rigors of education. You just couldn't handle it. It would break your soft souls. Well, one of the things that if you take classes in sociology, you'll find time and time again that the dominant will use this same argument to keep down the subordinates wherever they can. The same argument was made when poor people coming out of World War II wanted to get an education. You just didn't have the mental capacity to perform. Same thing in reference to race. Blacks just didn't have the mental capacity to compete with their white counterparts. So gender it's not surprising that men make the same arguments about women. There was also a fear of emasculating the curriculum in order to to water it down enough for women to understand and women to be able to um, work their way through the rigors of academia. And of course, this is going to hurt men because men are not going to be held up to the high academic standards that are now being watered down to allow women to come into these institutions. Of course, fear of emasculating boys. You bring women into, or you bring girls into the educational setting, and part of the dumbing down and the gendering of education will work its way into boys, and boys will and what that really means is that we will be socializing girls into the ways of what boys generally do, which will be problematic for the girls, and then we will also be socializing boys into the way that girls think, which will then emasculate boys and effeminate them, which is the worst possible scenario if you're talking about continuing to have these male hierarchies passed on through gendered institutions like the family and the classroom. Early integration of women into college also met with opposition. It was argued that women didn't have the intelligence, of course, the mental capacity, and really it was a threat to the biology, that you just didn't have the biological capacity to deal with the rigors of education. But once we start to classroom, it becomes very clear that the classroom is going to be a gendering experience. We see this in nursery school and kindergarten, where you have sex-segregated areas of play, which teach boys and girls that one area where the Barbie dolls are and the Holly Homemaker stuff is, that's the girls' area. The other area where G.I. Joe dolls are and Army men and Tonka trucks are, that's the boys' area. And as these two groups begin to separate and socialize each other on how it is to be boys and how it is to be girls. Another reality of the gendered classroom is that females tend to receive less active instruction, whether that is calling on them in class, whether that is asking them harder questions. Females tend to get less attention than males do. As I said, male students are called on more often. It's assumed that girls like to read, hate math and science classes. If you looked at the image, the joke or the comic at the end, it had two boys up there at the math at the chalkboard doing a math problem. One boy got the problem wrong, and the other boy looks at him and says, "Boy, you're stupid." Is a boy and a girl, and when the girl gets the question wrong, the boy looks at the girl and says, "Girls are stupid." You can see how they move from the individual to the group very easily, and it's really telling that the first words that came out of Barbie in 1992, when Mattel first put voice recordings in Barbie dolls, was "Math is hard." Talk about that many of our young girls were going to be forced to hear toys. But as they get older, we see a lot of gender divergence in adolescence and early adulthood. So things have changed a little bit. An emphasis on physical beauty really starts to take shape. This becomes very important in the way that young girls present themselves in the social settings, appropriate styles